Her husband left her for a younger beauty, thinking he'd live a dream life, but she shocked everyone. The dining room was dimly lit, filled with the quiet hum of the evening. The scent of roast chicken hung in the air, but the plate remained untouched. In front of it sat a tall glass of wine, perfectly full. Olivia stared at it without blinking. Her husband, Matthew, had just uttered the words she never expected to hear after 2 decades of marriage. "I think we should get a divorce." Her fork dropped silently onto the table. It wasn't anger or shock that hit her first, it was numbness. Not once in 20 years had she imagined this moment, especially not delivered with such sterile calmness. Matthew's expression didn't change. He sat across from her, wearing the same business suit he had left with that morning. His tie was slightly loosened, as if he had practiced saying it during his commute. "There's someone else," he continued, like it was a line from a script. "She's younger, we're more compatible now." Olivia blinked slowly. The glass of wine remained untouched, the steam from the food faded. She felt the warmth drain from her hands. It was surreal, he wasn't just leaving. He was replacing her. She wasn't enough anymore. Not exciting. Not youthful. Just ordinary. She expected sadness, maybe even anger, but instead, a dull emptiness settled over her like thick fog. Olivia didn't beg. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood up and walked to the sink, placing the untouched glass of wine next to the plate. "Is this what you really want?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Matthew didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his phone, then met her eyes. "You're a good woman, Olivia. But you've become boring. Predictable." Each word struck like a slap. Boring. Predictable. Words she had feared but never thought she'd hear from the man she once believed adored her stability. "I want to live, Olivia," he said. "Not just exist." She turned away, fighting the sting in her eyes. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the erasure of everything she believed they had built. A lifetime reduced to a single accusation, that she was no longer enough. He didn't even say he regretted it. He didn't say sorry. He walked into the hallway, grabbed his pre-packed bag, and left the house without looking back. When the door closed, the silence that followed was louder than any argument they had ever had. And just like that, her role in his story was over. In the days that followed, Olivia walked through her house like a ghost. Their home, once filled with shared routines and quiet companionship, now echoed with absence. His favorite mug was still in the cupboard. His books, untouched, still lined the shelf. She couldn't bring herself to move them. It was like admitting that he was truly gone. The mail continued to arrive in both their names, as if the world hadn't gotten the memo. Neighbors waved, unaware. Her friends sent messages, but she ignored them. There was nothing to say. What could she tell them? That she was left behind for someone 20 years younger? The woman, whose name Olivia learned soon after, was named Bella. A fitness coach with a rising presence online. Tall, beautiful, endlessly energetic. Bella embodied everything Matthew said Olivia wasn't. She saw their photos weeks later on social media, smiling on a beach, wine glasses in hand, captioned with, "Finally free to live life to the fullest." The words made her chest tighten. Not because she wanted him back, but because the life they had lived together was being painted as a mistake. Like she had held him back from his true self. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a quiet rewrite of their history. Olivia hadn't heard of Bella before. But now, she seemed to be everywhere. Sponsored ads. Workout videos. Interviews. Bella's presence was blinding. She was 24, 20 years younger than Olivia. Her skin glowed, her hair bounced, and her laugh rang like a bell in every video she posted. She had tens of thousands of followers, many of whom praised her for her natural charm and authentic spirit. But Olivia saw the calculated precision in everything Bella did, the perfectly timed smiles, the curated captions, the gentle digs at women who settle for mediocrity. It was clear who those jabs were meant for. Matthew, now appearing regularly in Bella's content, looked like a man reborn. He wore bright colors, laughed louder, and spoke like someone tasting life for the first time. He had quit his job at the consulting firm and was now investing in wellness and lifestyle brands, according to one post. Olivia watched from afar, like observing a stranger inhabiting her former husband's body. It was surreal. This man, who once spent Sunday mornings reading financial reports, was now posing in yoga gear beside waterfalls. Every photo screamed of reinvention. Olivia didn't recognize him anymore. And worse, she no longer recognized herself. The first time she saw them in person after the divorce was at a friend's birthday dinner. Olivia had considered not going, but her friend insisted, promising a low-key gathering. She walked in wearing a simple black dress, hair tied back neatly, hoping to blend in. But halfway through the night, laughter erupted near the entrance. When she turned, she saw them, Matthew and Bella, arms entwined, eyes scanning the room like celebrities entering a red carpet. Bella wore a dress so tight it looked painted on. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Olivia froze. They didn't see her at first. But when Matthew did, he blinked, then smiled faintly, as if greeting an old neighbor. Bella looked her up and down and whispered something in his ear. He chuckled. Then, loud enough for those nearby to hear, he said, "Funny how some people just never move on." Laughter followed. Olivia felt heat rush to her face. She stood still, wine glass trembling in her hand. That night, she left early, her dignity hanging by a thread. She cried in the car, not because she missed him, but because she had been reduced to a punchline. And that was the moment she decided, enough was enough. In the days after the dinner, Olivia felt stripped of her last layer of dignity. Every laugh at that party echoed in her memory, but she never retaliated. She didn't lash out or post cryptic messages online. Instead, she retreated into herself. Silence became her armor. She went to work, came home, and avoided social gatherings. Her world had shrunk, but her resolve had begun to stir quietly. She would not let that be her final memory in their story. There had to be more to her life than being the woman he left behind. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror, observing the woman who had become nearly unrecognizable to her. Lines had deepened around her eyes. Her shoulders slouched with the weight of years spent serving others. But beneath that, something raw and unwavering remained. She whispered to her reflection, "This isn't the end. It can't be." And for the first time in weeks, she didn't cry. She started writing down everything she had given up, dreams, habits, hobbies. It was a long list. And at the bottom, she wrote just one word in bold, "Me." Olivia hadn't written a resume in over a decade. She had left her corporate job years ago to support Matthew's consulting firm from behind the scenes, managing schedules, organizing documents, ensuring every client left satisfied. But none of it had been official. No titles. No paychecks. Just silent support. Now, as she sat in a corner coffee shop, resume template open on her old laptop, her hands trembled. Where would she even begin? Her last official job had been in HR management, nearly 15 years ago. It felt like a different life. She sipped her lukewarm coffee and decided to be brutally honest on paper. Team coordinator. Administrative lead. Financial planner. All roles she had filled while Matthew basked in credit. She applied for small office jobs, entry-level, part-time, anything to get her foot back in. Most rejected her within days. But one reply stood out. A local cafe, known more for its community vibe than coffee, needed someone to handle customer records and inventory. The pay was modest, but it was a start. Olivia printed her resume, dressed in her best blazer, and walked in for the interview with her heart pounding. The cafe was bright and cozy, filled with potted plants and light jazz. Behind the counter stood a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, with cropped hair and a warm smile. "You must be Olivia," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Zoe, the owner." The interview felt more like a conversation. Zoe asked questions about multitasking, dealing with people, staying calm under pressure. Olivia answered with quiet confidence, surprised by how natural it felt. She hadn't realized how much she had managed over the years, balancing finances, hosting events, organizing last-minute dinners for clients. None of it had ever been paid. But all of it had value. The next day, Zoe called and offered her the position. Olivia accepted immediately, her voice steady though her hands trembled with emotion. It wasn't the salary or the prestige, it was the validation. Someone had looked at her and seen value. Her first day was filled with nervous energy, but by the end of her shift, Zoe smiled and said, "You've got a great way with people. You make this place warmer." Olivia hadn't heard words like that in a long time. For the first time in months, she went to bed without bitterness. Her journey back had just begun. The cafe job was a blessing, but it wasn't without its challenges. A few of the younger employees treated Olivia like an outsider. Whispers when she walked in. Jokes about her being too old for this pace. Olivia smiled through it all, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She had faced far worse humiliation before. Still, the passive dismissal chipped away at her self-esteem. Zoe noticed. "Ignore them," she said one afternoon. "They don't know your story." Olivia nodded, grateful, but inside, she knew this wasn't where she belonged forever. Every night, she returned home exhausted, not just from work but from pretending she wasn't affected. She began taking notes again, like she did in the early days of her healing. Lists of things she was good at, moments that gave her purpose. Eventually, she realized what the discomfort meant. This wasn't her destination. It was a stepping stone. She didn't know what was next, but something inside her had begun to shift. For the first time in years, Olivia felt ambition rising again. Not to prove Matthew wrong, but to prove to herself that she was still capable of more. Among the clatter of cups and morning rushes, there was one employee who didn't treat Olivia like she was invisible. Her name was Hannah, a vibrant, tattooed 20-something who often hummed indie songs while stocking pastries. At first, their conversations were brief. But over time, Olivia noticed that Hannah stayed back during her shifts just to chat. One afternoon, after closing, Hannah leaned against the counter and said, "You know, you're different from the others. There's something solid about you." Olivia laughed, caught off guard. "Solid? That's a first." Hannah grinned. I mean it in a good way. You don't pretend. And you listen. Most people my age just talk. That was the beginning of an unlikely friendship. They'd sit in the back room during breaks, talking about books, life, and broken dreams. Olivia learned that Hannah was the daughter of a well-known business owner, one who ran a growing wellness company. Dad says I should find someone with brains and integrity to help with a new division he's building, Hannah said one day, almost offhandedly. Someone like you. Olivia blinked. Me? Hannah nodded. Why not? And just like that, a door opened that Olivia didn't even know existed. Olivia didn't think much of Hannah's comment at first. It sounded like a compliment thrown in passing. But a few days later, Hannah returned with a folder in her hands. My dad wants to meet you, she said. Olivia froze. For what? Hannah shrugged casually. He owns Trevista Wellness. He's looking for someone to help manage the operations of a new branch. I told him you've got more experience than anyone I know. Olivia nearly laughed. Trevista was one of the fastest growing companies in the wellness market. She was serving coffee yesterday. Today, she was being considered for an executive-level project? Her initial instinct was to decline. It sounded too good, too sudden. But Hannah insisted. You're the first person I've met who understands people, she said. Dad needs that. Someone grounded. Someone with empathy. Olivia sat with that thought all night. It wasn't ambition that drove her to say yes, it was the realization that for the first time in years, someone saw value in what she had to offer. Not because of her looks, her age, or her relationship status. Just her. She agreed to meet Hannah's father, but kept her expectations low. After all, people had underestimated her before. Maybe this time, she would prove everyone, including herself, wrong. The office was sleek, modern, and intimidating. Olivia walked into the waiting area wearing her best blazer, the same one she had worn to get the cafe job months ago. Now it felt like a suit of armor. Hannah's father, Russell, greeted her with a warm but firm handshake. I hear you've impressed my daughter, he said. Olivia smiled nervously. The interview was not what she expected. Instead of grilling her with metrics and targets, Russell asked about her past, her decision-making style, and how she handled people under pressure. When she described managing logistics and emotional crises for her ex-husband's business, he nodded with genuine interest. At the end of their meeting, he leaned back and said, You're exactly what I've been looking for. Olivia blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. This branch we're launching isn't just about products, he explained. It's about building community, structure, integrity. I need someone who understands that. Hannah was right. The offer was formalized by the end of the week. She would manage the operations of a small, but crucial, branch, working with vendors, building outreach programs, and overseeing a modest team. The salary was nearly triple what she made at the cafe. But more than the money, it was the belief in her potential that left her stunned. The onboarding process was overwhelming at first. Olivia felt out of place in a world of polished presentations, corporate lingo, and fast-paced tech tools. Most of her colleagues were younger, highly educated, and fluent in systems she had never used before. She questioned herself at every turn. Had she taken on more than she could handle? Was this just another setup for failure? But every time she wanted to back down, she remembered that dinner party months ago, Matthew's smirk, Bella's whisper. That humiliation had burned, but now it fueled her. She stayed up late watching tutorials, reading reports, and asking questions even when it made her feel exposed. Slowly, the confusion faded. She began to connect the dots. The instincts she once used to manage client events and streamline chaos in her marriage translated perfectly to team coordination and crisis handling. Her ability to listen, to predict problems before they exploded, became her superpower. After the first month, Russell pulled her aside and said, "You've exceeded expectations." Olivia smiled for the first time in weeks, not because someone praised her, but because she finally believed it was true. By the third month, Olivia had transformed the atmosphere at the branch. Staff turnover dropped. Communication between departments became smoother. Vendors, once frustrated with delays and mixed messages, now praised her professionalism. She didn't lead with force, she led with clarity and respect. When problems arose, she addressed them calmly. When tension flared, she listened first, spoke second. Her presence brought stability. Even Russell, who rarely visited day-to-day operations, noticed the change and mentioned it in a board meeting. Hannah texted her later, "Dad said you saved the launch." "Told you so." Olivia still doubted herself on hard days, but they were fewer and farther between now. Her mornings began with purpose. She no longer looked in the mirror and saw someone left behind, she saw someone building forward. Meanwhile, social media kept her updated on Matthew and Bella's life, though she checked less and less. Their posts seemed louder now, more performative. Poses in luxury spas. Captions about true happiness. But something about their eyes felt hollow. Olivia no longer envied them. She no longer felt like the woman abandoned. She was becoming the woman reborn. It was a quiet Tuesday when Olivia first heard the news. One of her coworkers mentioned in passing that a popular influencer had been involved in a public scandal involving fake endorsements and unpaid taxes. Olivia's heart skipped. The name that followed was unmistakable, Bella Matthews. She quickly opened her browser, and sure enough, headlines sprawled across entertainment sites, "Fitness star Bella under fire for fraudulent partnerships." Comments were brutal. Sponsors were backing out. Even worse, her once devoted followers turned on her with lightning speed. By the end of the week, another headline appeared, "Matthews & Co. Consulting Files for Bankruptcy." Olivia read the article twice, hands still. The consulting firm Matthew had rebuilt with Bella had collapsed under bad investments and lack of oversight. Rumors swirled about infighting, lavish spending, and financial mismanagement. But Olivia didn't feel vindicated. She didn't smile. Instead, she felt strangely detached. The life that had once humiliated her was now unraveling, but she had already walked away from that version of herself. Still, deep down, she knew, fate has a way of bringing people full circle. The scandal spread like wildfire. Influencer accounts dissected every detail of Bella's collapse, turning her downfall into a digital spectacle. Olivia scrolled through the posts with quiet disbelief. Bella's apologies seemed rehearsed. One teary video was followed by an ad for skin cream. The disconnect was stunning. Matthew, once so proud of their curated lifestyle, had vanished from social media. His silence was deafening. Comment sections speculated, divorce? Bankruptcy? Olivia didn't care for the gossip. She was no longer part of that world. But there was a strange satisfaction in seeing the truth surface, something she had never dared wish for out loud. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. What she felt was clarity. For years, she had internalized Matthew's rejection, believing she wasn't enough. That she had aged out of value. That her stability was dull. But watching their perfect world fall apart without her, she understood she hadn't been the problem. She had been the glue. The peace. The consistency. And now, free from the weight of his expectations, she was thriving in a life that finally felt hers. Let them collapse, she thought. I have already rebuilt. One morning, as Olivia sorted through emails in her office, she noticed an unfamiliar name in her inbox, an event coordinator from the National Women in Leadership Summit. The email was short and polite. We'd love to invite you to speak about personal reinvention and leadership transformation. She blinked. Her? Speak? In front of executives, founders, and professionals? She reread the message several times. Apparently, a board member, Russell, had recommended her. She's someone who rebuilt her identity from the ground up, he had said. Olivia stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The thought of standing on a stage made her stomach twist. But something deeper stirred beneath her fear, an old voice, buried but never forgotten, whispering, "You have something worth sharing." After days of reflection, she said yes. Not for recognition. Not for revenge. But because the woman who had once been discarded now had wisdom forged from experience. She began preparing, crafting her speech with care. Each word traced a path from brokenness to strength. She chose honesty over polish, vulnerability over pride. She knew the audience didn't need a perfect heroine. They needed someone real. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to be seen. The weeks before the summit were a blur of writing, rehearsing, and quiet panic. Olivia practiced her speech in front of mirrors, in empty boardrooms, even in her car. Each time, she found her voice a little stronger. Hannah helped her with tone and timing. Russell offered notes, but gently. Speak from the scar, not the wound, he advised. Olivia took that to heart. She didn't want to sound bitter. She wanted to sound whole. Her story wasn't about betrayal anymore, it was about becoming. As the date approached, she bought a new outfit. Something elegant, simple, and powerful. Standing in the fitting room, she studied herself in the mirror. Her reflection didn't just show age. It showed survival. Grace. She smiled, not because she looked perfect, but because she looked like herself. The night before the event, she wrote one final line on her notepad, then paused. She looked out the window and whispered, "Tomorrow, I speak my truth. And I won't look down." The ballroom was enormous, rows of white chairs, towering floral arrangements, spotlights waiting. Olivia stood backstage, heart pounding. But when her name was announced, she stepped forward without hesitation. The applause was warm, but one face in the audience made her blood still. Matthew. Sitting in the back, half hidden behind a pillar. His hair was grayer. His eyes tired. But it was him. And beside him, though more distant than ever, was Bella, face blank. Olivia's hands didn't tremble. She began speaking, her voice clear, her message unwavering. She didn't mention names. She didn't need to. Her story, of being replaced, dismissed, and reborn, spoke for itself. The audience listened in rapt silence. She spoke of losing her identity, of rebuilding it from the ground up. Of how sometimes, what feels like the end is just the beginning of who we were meant to become. And in the back of the room, Matthew slowly leaned forward, his eyes widening with recognition. Bella turned to whisper something, but he didn't respond. Olivia never broke her gaze. That stage was hers now. And for the first time, she stood above it all. As the crowd rose in applause, Olivia exited the stage, pulse racing with something between exhaustion and euphoria. Backstage, event organizers congratulated her. A few women in tears hugged her, whispering thank you. But the moment that lingered came minutes later, when she walked into the networking lounge and heard a voice mutter, "Wait, is that really her?" It was Matthew. He stood a few steps away, disbelief etched across his face. Bella stood beside him but offered no smile, no comment, just silence. Olivia looked him in the eye, her expression calm. "Hello, Matthew," she said. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he simply stared, like seeing her for the first time. She didn't gloat. She didn't ask him how things had turned out. She just nodded and walked past him, her posture steady. Behind her, she heard him say quietly, almost to himself, "I never thought she'd become this." But Olivia didn't turn back. She had places to be. And the man who once called her boring was now a ghost in a crowd she no longer belonged to. As Olivia left the lounge, word of her speech rippled through the summit like wind through tall grass. People she had never met approached her with admiration, calling her words courageous and transformative. She received invitations to speak at other events, offers for interviews, and one executive quietly slipped her a business card, saying, "We could use a woman like you on our board." Olivia smiled, humbled yet composed. But amidst all the praise, her mind lingered on Matthew's stunned face. Not because she needed his validation, but because, for once, the roles were reversed. He was the one left speechless. Later that evening, at the private dinner for speakers, Olivia stood beneath golden chandeliers, sipping sparkling water as jazz played softly in the background. A group of women, executives, entrepreneurs, and founders gathered around her. "You said everything I never had the courage to say," one admitted, her voice trembling. Another leaned in and whispered, "When you talked about being discarded, I felt seen." Olivia nodded gently. In this elegant space of power and privilege, it wasn't wealth that connected them, it was pain. Shared pain. And the quiet, fierce dignity that comes with surviving it. A week after the summit, Olivia received an email. The subject line read only, "Matthew." Her hands hovered over the keyboard for several seconds before she clicked. The message was short. No apology. No explanation. Just a single line, "You've become someone I no longer recognize, and maybe I never truly knew." Olivia sat back, the weight of those words hitting her in an unexpected way. It wasn't closure. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. For a man like him, that was monumental. Still, she didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She had already said everything that mattered, on stage, to the world. That night, she deleted the message and shut her laptop. She walked out to her small garden and sat under the fading evening light. The silence felt clean. Not empty. She didn't feel the urge to call anyone or relive what happened. She simply let the stillness wrap around her. The chapter with Matthew had ended long ago, but now, even the echo of him was gone. She had risen, not in spite of being left behind, but because of it. His email was a footnote now, nothing more. The following Monday, Russell called her into his office. Olivia assumed it was to debrief after the summit, but the conversation took a surprising turn. "I'm stepping away from day-to-day operations next year," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "And I want you to run the division." Olivia blinked, stunned. "You're offering me a promotion?" He nodded. "You've already been doing the work of a director. It's time the title matched your contribution." She struggled to speak. She had never aimed for power. But now that it was being offered on merit, on earned respect, it felt like justice. She accepted, slowly, carefully, grateful but not overwhelmed. As she walked back to her office, Olivia felt a quiet pride she had never known in her marriage. With Matthew, her accomplishments had always been his stepping stones. Her ideas absorbed into his plans, her labor masked as support. Now, everything she built bore her name. Her decisions, her risks, her growth. The girl he once called predictable had become a leader. And not by pretending to be someone younger, louder, or flashier, but by becoming fully herself. Weeks passed. Olivia continued leading with the grace and precision that had defined her rise. Her calendar filled with speaking engagements, mentorship programs, and internal strategy meetings. Yet, there was one message she never received, an apology from Bella. The young woman who once smirked at her across a dining table, who strutted with Matthew like she had won a prize, remained silent. But Olivia no longer craved an apology. She saw Bella differently now, not as the woman who won her husband, but as someone chasing youth as currency, burning through attention to feel worth. She heard through acquaintances that Bella had stepped away from public life. The scandal had taken its toll. Sponsorships had ended. The glamour faded. And yet, no redemption arc had followed. Olivia had once feared that Bella would thrive while she withered. But time, she learned, has its own logic. What's built on vanity cannot outlast what's built on purpose. Olivia no longer needed to be seen by Bella, or anyone else, as a victim of the past. She was too busy living in her present, a life filled with meaning, respect, and choice. At the end of the quarter, Trevista hosted its annual corporate gala. The event was held at a 5-star venue downtown, filled with glass walls and skyline views. Olivia arrived in a midnight blue dress, simple but striking. As she entered, colleagues turned their heads. She moved with a quiet elegance that commanded attention. During dinner, Russell toasted her leadership, calling her the backbone of this year's success. Applause erupted. She raised her glass, smiled softly, and nodded, grateful, not for the recognition, but for the journey it symbolized. Later that night, as she stood on the terrace alone, looking out at the city lights, a man approached her from across the room. Not Matthew. Not anyone from the past. Just someone new, respectful, and kind. He asked her how she managed such a graceful rise. She answered, by first falling apart. He nodded, intrigued. They talked for 20 minutes, about work, travel, and music. Nothing intense. Nothing forced. Just real conversation. Olivia smiled as she said goodbye. She wasn't searching anymore. She wasn't running. She had arrived. And this night would be one she'd carry in her heart, not because of who noticed her, but because she finally noticed herself. A few weeks after the gala, Olivia received a call from a well-known national morning show. The producer explained that one of the guests had seen her summit speech and was moved. "We'd love for you to share your journey on our segment about reinvention," the woman said. Olivia hesitated at first. National television was a different scale, but eventually agreed. Not for fame, but because so many women still lived in silence, convinced they had no second chapter. If her voice could offer even one person a sliver of hope, it would be worth it. The studio was cold, the lights blinding. But when the host asked, "What would you say to someone who feels discarded after being left for someone younger?" Olivia didn't flinch. She smiled gently and said, "You are not less because someone couldn't see your value. Sometimes, people leave not because you lack, but because they do." The room fell quiet. Cameras rolled. And in that moment, millions watched a woman once cast aside stand tall, not with bitterness, but with dignity. Her inbox filled within hours. Messages from strangers saying, "Thank you for giving me permission to believe again." Olivia never imagined she'd become a mentor. But invitations kept coming, from organizations, universities, even private retreats. Women of all ages wanted to hear her story, not for gossip, but for the strength it carried. And so, she began mentoring quietly, never charging, never advertising. She met with women who had been cheated on, overlooked, silenced, and underestimated. In coffee shops and small office spaces, she listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, it wasn't from a place of superiority, but from the raw honesty of someone who had lived through it all. She often told them, rebuilding doesn't start with revenge. It starts with remembering who you were before the world made you feel small. Some cried. Others laughed. Most simply nodded, a flicker of light rekindled behind tired eyes. Olivia found fulfillment not in applause or titles, but in those quiet moments of connection. She was no longer chasing validation. She had become the woman her younger self needed during those nights of heartbreak. That was the victory. Not her job, not the stage, but the legacy of resilience she passed on without ever raising her voice. Years passed, but Olivia never forgot the version of herself who once cried in her car outside a dinner party. That night had changed her, not because of what they said, but because of what it awoke. One afternoon, while organizing old files, she stumbled across the photo of her and Matthew from their 5th wedding anniversary. She paused. Not in pain, but in peace. She didn't hate him anymore. He had served his role in her life, he had broken what needed breaking for her to rebuild. Instead of throwing the photo away, she placed it in a drawer. A quiet symbol of her past, now archived. That evening, she went for a walk near the park, where she passed couples, joggers, and children laughing. A young woman bumped into her and apologized, "Sorry, ma'am." Olivia smiled. She was older now, yes, but wiser, stronger, fuller. And above all, happy. Not the kind of happy that needs proof or permission, just a steady, deep joy from knowing she had survived and transformed. The call came on a quiet Sunday. A major nonprofit organization focused on women's leadership offered Olivia a position as executive advisor. They had been watching her journey for months and believed her insight could shape their new initiatives. It wasn't just a title, it was trust. And it came without additions, explanations, or comparisons. She accepted, grateful yet grounded. It was no longer about what she could gain, but what she could give. On her first day at the foundation, she arrived early, standing outside the tall building with her hand resting on the railing. She remembered the first time she had walked into the cafe looking for a job, unsure if she still belonged in the working world. Now, she stepped through those doors not as a beginner, but as a beacon. Her voice, once silenced by betrayal, had become a guiding light for others. This wasn't an end. It was the start of a legacy built not from ashes, but from growth. On the 5th anniversary of her divorce, Olivia sat in the same garden where she had once wept in silence. The flowers were in full bloom. The air carried the scent of jasmine. She poured a small glass of wine, not in sadness, but in ceremony. She wasn't mourning anymore. She was honoring her transformation. She picked up a pen and wrote a single sentence in her journal. "Thank you for leaving. I never would have found myself if you had stayed." She closed the book and looked at the sky. There was no bitterness left. Only gratitude. For the pain that shaped her. For the fall that awakened her. For the journey that brought her home to herself. And with that, she stood, walked inside, and never looked back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because it had done its job. She had become more than anyone expected, including herself. She had become whole.